All right, so today we're at Groupon, and we're going to be talking about some of the great things that Rails has built in for us. If you want to be following along, you can. If not, that's totally okay as well. Today we have an app that's been partially built out for us that we'll talk a little bit about. And we're going to talk about all these great things like RESTful routing, route helpers. We're going to talk about link helpers and form helpers, partials and things of that nature. And then we'll stop right around, we'll go over before actions. We'll stop right around here and we'll split that into a separate video. So let's first clone down what we have here, which is a Rails catalog. So I'm going to have this clone down. Open everything up in Sublime. Close this one out and move this one over. All right, first things first, like always, we're going to bundle install all of our stuff. Let's just make sure that we have pry. I know sometimes this doesn't ship off with pry. So I'm just going to add this inside my gem pry. And I'm going to bundle install. All right, from there I'm going to create, migrate, drop, create, migrate, and seed my database. And I'm going to type in bundle exec, Rails DB drop. Create, migrate, and just to make some things interesting, I believe the seeds file is empty, so we will create a few seeds, which means we'll need the faker gem. I'm going to just throw that in here, gem faker. And I think let's take a look at what we've got today. So right now we have one schema with a users, manufacturers, and products. I think we're only going to be dealing with manufacturers to start. So let's, each manufacturer has a name and a description. So let's create 30 manufacturers. So manufacturer create. We'll just say name is something, and then description is something else. We're going to run off to the Faker Gem website, and we're going to take a look at which Faker class might be good for us, just to kind of get started. We'll go with manufacturer. Company matches up pretty well. And here, let's use that then. We'll do Faker company. And then I think there was another one called Faker BS, because a lot of the times companies can say that they do cool things, but it might just be a load of BS. You'll notice at the top of this file, I don't have to require pry, I don't have to require faker or anything like that, because the moment I bundle install it, basically when you're writing just pure Ruby files, the issue becomes like you have to require relative every file, then you have to require all your different libraries. But if you are using Rails, they know that you're going to probably want to use all the gems and use all the libraries and all the different files as well. So you don't have to require anything up top. All right, so what's that? Good call right there, company.name. All right, so I've created the database, I've migrated everything over. It's an empty database with 3 tables right now with users, manufacturers, and products. So I'm going to just seed this database. And we'll just evaluate what we've got for right now. So let's just take a look at what we've got. So I'm going to load this up. I'm going to load up a server. And while I'm doing that, because I know I'm going to be doing a bunch of other stuff, I'm going to load up Rails routes on this side. So one of my tabs is running the server, one of them is empty right now. So let's just take a look at what localhost 3000 looks like. All right. It says there's an unknown format and a home controller index. Let's take a look at our routes. This is what we have to get started. Now, what we see so far is most of the things that we're used to. So yesterday we were doing things with businesses. We only had one. Resource being the table in the database, the model. Like if you have a table in the database, like called businesses, or in our case, it's called manufacturers, that's known as a resource. You can CRUD resources. So if I have a manufacturer which has many products, then I have two resources. I have manufacturer and products. Today, we're only dealing with one for right now, just to go over some of these nice things that Rails gives to you for free. So if I were to want to look for all of my routes, and I didn't want to look inside my routes.rb file, I can load up something called bundle exec Rails routes. Now, basically what Rails routes will do is it will read everything inside of this routes.rb and paste it out to the screen. And you're going to notice that like these are all of our existing routes, but in this first column, we have something called a prefix. And if you look up the config.rb right here, you'll see that some of these have prefixes that you can specify. So it's like manufacturers doesn't have a prefix because it's just its own singular word right here. This manufacturer / new, the prefix is new manufacturer because that's something that I specify. Of course, I can name this whatever I like. If I want to do something as ridiculous as poop, I can run Rails routes one more time, and you'll see that this actually changes to, if I wanted like a named route, like poop or something like that, anytime I refer to poop, it actually takes me to /manufacturer /new. So these are things that some of them are going to be inferred based on the URL that you're given, and other ones you're going to specify the way that you want. So we'll go back to the way things were, clear the screen, run Rails routes one more time. So as we're looking through this, what's the purpose of specifying a prefix? Turns out there's a bunch of like Rails helper methods that will help us make our development life a little bit easier as long as we specify those prefixes. For example, let's split this screen into two real quick. So we'll view this layout as two rows. Let's look inside of a manufacturer's controller. If you jump down to the destroy action or something like that, let's take a look right here. You see that like when I want to destroy this particular resource, this particular manufacturer, on line 54 it says redirect to manufacturer's path. Now manufacturer's path, like yesterday we had to deal with, if we wanted to redirect to like all the manufacturers, I would have to do redirect to, and then I would have to hard code the actual path itself. And instead today what we have is this manufacturer's path. So it's, if you can kind of see like manufacturer's path is a variable, but it's not really defined anywhere. But Rails knows that when it sees like the something path, something underscore path method, it should look inside the route prefixes and try to match it up. By abstracting this detail out to the routes rather than like specifying it directly, like where to take it in the controller here, we can like basically change the structure of the actual routes without having to change the controller. Which means that if you ever had to change, like, let's say you had to change, your boss said /manufacturers is actually going to be /manufacturers with another S. You would have to find the place that you would have to find all the URLs which say /manufacturers with one S and add another S at the end. And that goes across the board. And you can kind of see how that's a little bit brittle because if you miss one, your app might break for some people. So instead of doing that, all you have to do right here is if you use the named path everywhere, all you have to do is go inside your routes, just add that extra S, and then everywhere that manufacturer's path is called, it's now redirecting to manufacturers with a double S instead of a single S. That's kind of a ridiculous example. But you get the idea where it's, I only need to change it in one place rather than change it in 10 other places. And if you take a look a little bit earlier, even for this update, so let's say like I wanted to update a particular manufacturer, there's a strange thing that says redirect to @manufacturer on the redirect to @manufacturer on line 44. And that's kind of strange because it's kind of like I'm redirecting to a database record because at manufacturer is going to be some sort of database record. So I'm redirecting to a database record. That's not really making any sense. But since the prefix manufacturer is the same as one of the active record classes, meaning like one of the tables, one of the models, one of the database tables, which translates to one of the models. And yeah. So let me start over. Your database has a table called manufacturers. Your app has a model called manufacturer singular, and your routes are going to match up with that. So as long as the name of your variable and the variable that you find is the same as one of your active record classes, you can do some really clever redirections. So instead of saying like, I'm going to redirect to /manufacturers / like manufacturer ID, I think it's at manufacturer.id manufacturer. And I would have to interpolate here. But instead of typing all of this out like this, all I have to say is I'm going to redirect to this object. And then Rails will say like, oh, you want to redirect to an object? Doesn't make sense, but I know that that object exists in the database and you're probably talking about this. It makes those inferences for you so you don't have to type all of this out. And that's the kind of magic that Rails encourages. As long as your routes are named according to some pretty sensible conventions, Rails can auto-magically detect the correct path based only on the active record class that you have on line 40. Now it's line 45. So that's like that's one thing that you might want to use. These are called named routes. So instead of just saying redirect to an absolute path like we have in 44 here, you can just say redirect to the named path. And the named path is the prefix here, which will match up with one of these URI patterns. The next cool little thing that you can see is something called a link helper. So let's, knowing that we have /manufacturers here, let's go to actually just /manufacturers. /manufacturers. And now right here we have a list of the 30 seeded manufacturers that we created a little bit earlier. It's taking a little bit long, but there it is. We have a list of all the individual manufacturers that we want with a show, edit, and destroy functionality already built in. We decided to do most of this for you. Now I've got 3 links for every single manufacturer on the screen here. Let's take a look at index.html.erib. And this is the page that's corresponding to what we see here on the screen. We have manufacturers, the name, the description, and the body, and we're iterating over all the manufacturers. Now, there are a few things that you see here, 19, 20, and 21. These are things that we really haven't seen before. We have a link to helper. And here we're basically using like another helper that Rails gives you. It basically link to, if you can kind of infer based on the name, it automatically builds links for you. And we're going to use these a lot. They provide a lot of conveniences that we can see instead of just hard coding out everything. So I believe, let's see, let's hover over this over here. So if you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, it says /manufacturer/1. You have the choice here. You can type out TD and then have an href going to /manufacturers/ and then you have to interpolate, so it's going to be manufacturer.id, and then you have to close that, and then you have to write show, and then close the href, and then close the TD. So, I mean, it's not a terribly much longer bit of code that you have to write. You know, it's just 30% more. What you can do here is this tiny little link to helper actually creates this entire link for you so that you don't actually have to do it. So the way that this works is that when you have a link to, it tells Rails, I'm going to create a link. Well, the word that's going to show up on the page is going to be the word show. And the second argument that comes in is going to be the path. Now you can hard code this path to an absolute route like /manufacturer/manufacturer ID, or you can use the Rails helper. Since we have an individual manufacturer, like we talked about over here on line 44, you can actually, it infers that it's talking about the manufacturer path. And since you're passing in an entire object, it knows the ID as well, so it automatically interpolates. So when I click this, it takes me to /1. So it's your call. You can, you can choose whether or not you want to use this. One is a little bit less verbose than the other. It may be a little bit unclear, but if you use these kinds of helpers all the time, it'll just cut down on your development time by quite a bit. And it's pretty highly recommended, just to save yourself some time. The second one here, we have link to, let's go back. The second one here, we have another link that says edit. So we have link to, which means that it's a Rails helper. It's going to generate a link for me. And the words that could show up on the screen is going to be edit. And the specific path that we're talking about is the edit manufacturer path. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means, so I'm going to jump down to my Rails routes. You can see this edit manufacturer prefix. So by default, it's going to take me here to /manufacturers/ID/edit. And I'm passing in an entire manufacturer. So an entire object from the database. That object is going to have an ID on it. So that's what's getting interpolated over here. The final one is kind of cool. Let's take a look at this last one. So we have link to destroy. Destroy is that thing that shows up on the screen. And it's taking me to the manufacturer path, similar like we see in line 19. But whenever you click on a link is a GET request. And instead, I want to delete it. So if you look over here, some of these are nested under other prefixes. So we have this manufacturer path. Now there's two options that it can do. It can either do a GET, which is by default what it's going to do, or it has the option to do a delete, which will take me to another controller action. So before we had to write something along the lines of like href equals, like I would have to take it to manufacturers/5, and then I have to create like a hidden input or something like hidden equals true or something. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I would have to hide an input within here, basically saying I'm going to change the method from a GET request to a delete request. So that's what's happening here. So I'm going to the manufacturer path, but instead of doing the GET, I'm overriding that method to be a delete. And this extra little bit right here is JavaScript that's going to come up on the screen. So that's this data hash right here. It's going to basically alert me onto the screen that says, "Are you sure?" So let's click that. Let's destroy this first one. Boyle LLC for scale compelling eyeballs. Destroy this, and then you can kind of see that little JavaScript pop up that says, "Are you sure?" Then I can click OK, and it goes away. That first one is gone. So again, link to destroy. That's what shows up on the page. It creates a link. It goes to the manufacturer path, which you can find right down here. By default, a link goes to a GET, but it also has the ability to be delete. All I have to do is tell it to override the method that's already there. And this little data thing here at the end basically says, like, creates a JavaScript alert button that comes up. So there are like hundreds of these kind of like small configuration things, some of these like Rails helpers that make your life easier. And the only way to really effectively use them, because you're kind of looking at this, you're kind of like, when am I ever going to use this? Why can't I just do things the old-fashioned way? You totally can. But this stuff will make your life just a little bit easier to, instead of typing out the entire link or typing out like the entire path or something like that. It just shortens your development time. And the only real way to do it is to just try it. There's obviously dozens more, if not hundreds more of these type small little things that could make your life easier, and you just have to Google around to take a look at what was there. All right, let's go into something called a partial. So let's say I wanted to edit Shields, Gutman, and Rodriguez for bleeding edge metrics. And I just want to kind of take a look what's going on with this edit form right here. So jump over here to edit.html.erb. And this seems a little bit wrong because I have such a small file. I know it's right because it says editing manufacturer, and if I type in poop, because I'm a mature adult, and I refresh this page, I just want to make sure that this shows up correctly. Okay, I know I'm editing at least the right page. I'll bring this back to be a mature adult. I have very, very small things going on here. And there again, we have these link to. So link to show, and it's taking me to the manufacturer path. And then link to back, it takes me to the manufacturer's path. You can kind of take a look over here in Rails routes to compare those two. This middle section right here is something that we haven't seen before. It just says render form, and then it's passing in some local variables, manufacturer, and the value of that is going to be manufacturer, which is passed down from the controller. It turns out that we can render a template within a template. So what does that really mean? So I go to app, I go to views, go to manufacturers. I have all of these views over here. All of these are templates. Like everything is, from the top layer we have layouts. This is the first thing that's being loaded in. Next we have, sorry, let's start over. So when you first visit any sort of page, application.html.erb, this layout is first created. And everything shares the same like style sheets and JavaScript and titles and everything. And then it yields over to the body, meaning that it goes down into the individual templates down here. Under edit, it's yet again going to render another template underneath that, and it's going to be actually form over here. So just like we can yield our time over to these individual templates, these individual templates can actually have sub-templates underneath there, like this form. So why would we want to do this? You may wonder if you can render a template in this template as well. Like if I go down from application.html.erb to edit down to form, can I render another partial? The answer is yes, because it's actually just templates all the way down. The main thing you have to recognize here is this little underscore on the front means that it's a partial. It's a partial template. It's not the whole thing, but it's a part of it. There's two big reasons why we want to do this. First things first, let's take a look at show. Actually, let's go to edit. I'm going to open a new window. And then new, I'm also going to open it up in a new window. You can kind of see just by quickly going between these two tabs here that the form is almost identical. There's a name and description with some sort of button right there. And because the two are identical, that means I'm probably going to need to copy and paste my code for my form inside of edit and inside of new. But we want to reduce duplication. So since it's nearly identical, we can just consolidate it into one so we don't have to copy and paste. The second thing is that you want to cut down on the complexity by separating out sections. One of the problems that you're going to run into as your applications get larger is that your partials are going to be hundreds of lines long. So let's actually take a look at this in real life. So I have new, I'm going to drag it down here, and I have edit. If I were to grab all of the stuff from form and throw it inside of here, and do the same thing up here, one, it's duplicated code. Edit and HTML, edit and new have the exact same form inside of them. That kind of sucks to have. On top of that, there's a lot of mental energy expended by just opening up this file and saying like, oh my gosh, look at how much extra code there is here. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to copy out all this code, just get rid of it, and we're going to throw it inside of form.html.erb so that this particular file just takes care of the form. And then it's a little bit nicer, at least in my opinion, just to look at here and go, okay, new manufacturer, I understand this. It's rendering a form, cool. And then it has a link to back. Okay, that's fine. So all the heavy lifting is going down one layer. Okay, there's that form I was talking about, rather than going like this edit right here and saying like, oh my gosh, there's so much extra stuff I have to read through. It's actually not that way. It's just rendering a form. That's all there is. So let's practice this latter form of abstraction. So let's take a look at our get index. So when we go to our index page /manufacturers, and this is probably a good time for you all to kind of take a look up here. So if we go to /manufacturers, we have every single manufacturer. So I go inside of my routes.rb. So when I make a request here, it's going to the manufacturer's controller and the index action. So I go to manufacturer's controller, go up to the index action, and it's finding me all the manufacturers and passing it down into the template called index.html.erb. Now, if you can kind of take a look in here, it's starting to get a little busy. It's not terribly complicated right now, but you can kind of see if your manufacturer got a little bit larger, maybe if you wanted to say like, if you wanted any additional things here, like maybe an address, a phone number, or like a location or something like that, it's going to get a little bit larger, and then as a result, this giant block of code is also going to get larger. So what we can do is that we're going to basically render a partial within here. So I'm going to replace this whole block of code with just this. And I'm going to take all of this out. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to iterate over each one of the manufacturers, and then I'm going to render the manufacturer partial, which will basically do all of this instead. So I'm going to cut this, create a new file, and since it's a partial, it's going to be _manufacturer.rb, .html.erb. And in its place, I'm just going to throw this in there. If all goes well, if I refresh this page, it'll look completely identical. And it does. So again, I didn't do anything revolutionary. I just took the giant block of code in here. So instead of looking at all of this, you know, it's not a terribly large amount. I just took this out and dumped it inside its own partial just to clear up a little bit of space. This is a little bit easier to read, saying like, okay, I have an index page right here. I'm going to iterate over each one of those manufacturers, and I'm going to render its specific partial right over here. So as your views are going to be becoming more and more complex, if you separate them out into partial, it's going to make them easier to understand, easier to maintain. All right, the last little bit before we break off of this, like Rails helpers, is form for. So if you take a look inside of the edit page right here, it's going to take me to the form partial. And you can kind of see on line 1, what we've got here is a form for helper. So this is like the next great Rails helper. And if you, let's take a look at edit for a second. If I inspect the element, and I take a look, oh my gosh, how do I get this bigger? Oh, it's terrible. You can kind of see that even though I have like no HTML, like strict HTML for like a form, it actually creates the form for me completely, which is really nice. I didn't have to say like form for like path and method and all that kind of stuff. It just automatically filled all of that in for me. So there's really no magic underneath the hood here. This is just, form for is just short for form action equals post, and then path is going to be something else. It's like /manufacturers /manufacturer ID or something like that. Like there's no magic. This is just shorthand for line 2. And luckily with this manufacturer here, Rails also automatically detects whether or not we're going to be dealing with a new manufacturer object or dealing with an existing one. And that's great because our form partial doesn't need to know whether or not we're dealing with a new or already existing thing. So it's really done out of laziness. Lazy programmers equals less code. So it's just think of it that way. So whenever we use the form for helper, we get a form builder object, and you can kind of see that's where this form for manufacturer do F comes from. And we can create inputs for our particular user. So if you take a look over here, I have like f.submit. This is saying like this is part of the form.submit. Where is the other one? Yeah, that's the big one for this one. So yeah, that's just an example of another form helper. And finally, we have this last little bit. Promise this is the last little one before we move on to nested resources. Is a before action inside the controllers. So earlier this week, when we were doing things like show or edit or update or delete, all of these, if you notice, have a colon ID on them. Like when you edit a manufacturer, you need the ID of them. When you get the new one, or you delete it, or you update, you're always going to need the ID over here. And we were always duplicating our code. We always had to do like @manufacturer equals manufacturer find params ID. And we had to repeat that here and on update and on show. We had to repeat it pretty much everywhere, which kind of sucked. And we had like 4 or 5 lines that did exactly the same thing. We repeated ourselves. Luckily, Rails gives us this great thing called before action. It's part of every single controller. So what this line here is saying is before show, edit, update, and destroy, I'm going to execute this first, find a manufacturer. So before anything happens between lines 13 through 15, I'm going to execute find manufacturer. Before anything happens on edit, I'm going to find the manufacturer so that I don't have to type it in over and over on the first line. That's what we have here on line 59.